Welcome to Hot Flashbacks, where we boldly navigate the ups and downs and unexpected detours of our 30s and 40s while finally recalling how clueless we were in our 20s. I'm Molly Ward, your captain through this midlife roller coaster. Stick around for laughs, life lessons, and maybe a few I can't believe I survived that stories. Follow our journey on Instagram and Facebook at Hot Flashbacks. Make sure to like, follow, and share so I can keep making these episodes. Let's dive in.
The way we've lived our lives it's gonna catch up. Right?
It's all gonna come back and get you.
That.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm currently under siege from all of the grilled stuffed burritos that I used to eat at Taco Bell when I was 20. It is all getting me now because, metabolism
Taco
is a great
Bell
example of things
coming
that
to haunt you.
Yeah.
Welcome back to Hot Flashbacks. This is Molly Ward, and I'm here with a longtime friend who I feel like we've always been connected, social media connected, and like that feels like a real thing sometimes, even though I know that it's not real. And now we're connected for real and talking. My friend Kate, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, Molly. Hi, it's so good to see you. I feel like we've been following each other on Facebook for as long as Facebook existed.
Yep, that's
and you always talk on this podcast about how you like don't look like college students, but I actually think you look exactly the same as 1999 when I saw you last. So yeah, and I found when I was moving, I think I sent it to you, but I found this letter that you had written me when you were in college, and it was like you in the dorm room, and it was
handwritten.
Yeah, I was like,
oh my God.
I think I like took a picture of it and sent it to you because I'm like, how the hell this made it all the way to Germany?
What a throwback.
Letterbox somehow, yeah. So
I'm glad I'm Kate.
I know. I love Facebook. I don't care about these Gen Zs. Like everyone's telling me Facebook sucks. I'm like, my friend, I sent her something on Facebook. She's like, tell me you're old without telling me you're old. And I was like, I love Facebook. I don't know how, like, where else can you keep in touch with people? I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe that makes me old, I guess.
No, I think it is like, in that way, it feels different from Instagram. I really like Instagram. I think a lot of my old friends from high school and early college are still on Facebook and family. And so that's kind of where I'm living as well. That's how we know we're old, is because that's what my kids say. Facebook is for old people.
Wow. And how else? I mean, I don't know. I feel like with all the different handles, like, can you really keep track of people on TikTok or Instagram? To me, it's much more complicated to try to follow people, or it's because you want to Google. Yeah, but if you want to search for somebody,
you're right.
How are you going to find? You can't find somebody.
Yeah,
on Instagram.
No, you're right. And even my friends that I have on Instagram, I sometimes can't find. So I feel stupid. But last night I tried to tag a friend, and I had to send her a message and be like, where do you exist on Instagram?
Yeah.
Who are you?
Just like all these random handles. I'm like, who the hell are these people? If I dig a bit, I'm like, oh, that's, my best friend. Like, I don't know their handles. So
you're right. And then their picture's so small. You're like, I still don't know who you are because there's just this little tiny circle, and I don't even know whose face that is. So
yeah. So I can't track. For me, that's not keeping track of people.
Okay.
It's just like images. So
I feel that.
I've been really connected on Facebook. But yeah, I live in Berlin, and I'm a narrative therapist and a podcaster. So I'm happy to be on Molly's podcast, which I love so much.
Tell me what a narrative therapist is.
Okay. So I guess I studied anthropology and just like cultural studies and also literature, and narrative therapy was sort of born of this academic, basically interrogation of psychology, where it's like you are looking at cultural discourses and how cultural narratives influence identity. So it's a bit academic, but in basic terms, it's how do the stories that we inherit, whether that means culturally or family systems, how do the stories that we inherit impact our sense of self and our identities. And so, yeah, when I work with people, it's kind of listening for what kind of words they're using, what kind of phrasing, how they tell their story, and helping them to see it in a larger context. So how the stories we tell are going to influence how we see ourselves. And I see a lot of healing potential in that, just because you can really shift the way you relate to others and relate to the world based on how you are sharing your story.
I love that. I've never heard of it until I listened to your podcast and read about you. I think that makes so much sense to me in the way that, because we talk about family systems and the way that they work. And, I got my bachelor's in social work. So I generally have an interest in the way familial relationships developed and impact the way that you move in the world. And that narrative therapy idea makes a lot of sense to me. So I'm here validating and affirming that what you do makes a lot of sense to me. So
Thank you. Well, it's actually, it's kind of like the way I see it is like everything is the stories we tell. So even if you're talking about like daddy issues or something like that, it's like, what our daddy issues are the stories we inherit from our fathers, right? And then how we map those stories onto the men in our lives. So it's basically any problem or any situation, you can really dig deep into what the story is and then try to unpack that. And instead of, it's just a different angle.
But the way to some people frame it, that I think makes sense to a lot of people when you can put it that way. It doesn't feel, it's funny because you said it's very academic. It actually doesn't feel as academic when you say, okay, what is the story that we told ourselves and that we tell ourselves around this? And what are the stories that you've been told? And then how does that influence the way you move?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, sometimes, there's these belief systems or value systems. They can all be tied to stories, and stories are just meaning making, right? I think people hear the word stories and they think it means a fiction or something fabricated. But when I say stories, I just mean like the meaning. What meaning are you making of an event or a situation or words even? What meaning are you making out of your experience? And how can you better understand that to shift your perspective?
Yeah. Cool. I think you're doing the work of the people, like the work that people need. So, well, tell us really quick the name of your podcast, how people can find you, because I don't want to forget at the end of the episode when we get all crazy with our interesting discussion.
It's going to be so good. So the podcast is called About Face, and you can find me on Instagram at Kate Marleo. That's Marleo. And I'm on TikTok at Kate Marlene. And this is the German sort of pronunciation of Marlene. So it's Katemarlene. And I think that's kind of where I'm at. I'm on Facebook too, which we talked about. So I have a page. My practice is called Restoria. And so you can also find me there at www.restoriatherapy.com.
Nice. Thank you. Awesome.
Yeah. Thanks for asking.
Yeah. Let's get into it. So I'm actually super stoked you brought this topic up to me. And we had gone back and forth really about a number of things. And this really resonated with me because I think it's a really awesome, I don't want to say idea, but it's a really awesome process and experience that I don't think a lot of people give a lot of thought to. And that is, how do I reinvent myself as I age? Can I reinvent myself as I age, right? Am I still 20-year-old me, or does 40-year-old me look a lot different? And is some of that really intentional growth? Can I be someone different? And so when you brought this up, I thought this sounds awesome. And I'm excited to hear more about your journey. And so I guess I'll start by saying, you brought this up to me and said, you can reinvent yourself. You can change and become different and reinvent yourself in your middle ages. And I like that because I don't want people to feel stuck with who they are or what they've done, that you don't always have to be that. So tell me your story and tell me why this topic resonates deeply with you.
Yeah, I think I've always liked the idea of reinvention. I think even when I was younger, it was like, I like to move to new places or try new things. And I think there was always this part of me that felt like I liked the idea of a possibility of self, and I think regardless of our circumstances or, relationship status, job, like whatever we've done in our life or wherever we're currently at, I always believe there's room for becoming whoever you want to be. And I think the older I've gotten, the more this feeling of potential has become not just inspiring for me, but necessary in my aging process. So I got sober when I was 35, and that process of admitting to my problems with drugs and alcohol, being able to self-assess in that way of like, wow, I do have some healing work to do in this area. But yeah, getting sober and then having to go through a divorce with 2 little kids and living in a foreign country. Like for me, there were in the last 10 years, especially like all of these stages where it was like, oh, I have to look at myself. I have to see what else is possible for me, not just because of the pain, not just because of this uncomfortable sense of discontent in my life, but also where do I want to be? Where do I want to be in 5 years and 10 years? And if I'm not feeling content where I'm at for any reason, I always feel like there's room to change. And I think having gone through some in my life pretty significant changes, I think that has given me more faith, right, in this possibility. And so, yeah, I think it's really important because like I said to you before you started recording, is like, as we get older, our experiences and our, you could say trauma, but also just everything we've done, positive, negative, wherever we are at, it starts to harden us into a certain kind of person, or we start to see ourselves a certain way because of everything that's led us up to this point, right? Those experiences become the stories, which become our beliefs, right? Like, I am this or I am that. You can kind of get stuck in a narrative of who you are. But I think that's why it's really important as we age to leave open the possibility of like reevaluating those stories, right? Reevaluating these versions of self that could possibly keep us stuck.
Yeah, it's something simple, but also for me, a revelation was that I've always been an extrovert and I always really like to be social and I love chatting with people and it gives me a lot of energy. And then a couple of years ago, I sort of like, took a look in the mirror. It's like a phrase people use, but I took a minute to myself and thought, I don't know if I'm the extrovert I used to be. Like I find more solace in hanging out alone or being just in the same space with my wife and not doing anything. And I feel like I've moved the needle from one end of extroversion to a little closer to the middle on the introversion spectrum. And I thought, I think that for a long time I had told myself that I was this person, right? I had a role to play and I had expectations I created around who I was that
Right.
Until I sort of let that down, I wasn't able to really embrace the fact that sometimes I don't really want to be around people and that is okay. I don't have to push myself.
Yeah.
But I think about that a lot when I think about my queer identity as well. Because when you talk about sort of these stories that we tell ourselves or the stories that people tell us, I won't speak for like the whole queer community, but for myself, that's really influential in the way your sexual identity develops. And so when we're telling ourselves these things about who we are, sometimes it gets really convoluted into who we think we need to be. And that is where I think you can really stall, or I really stalled in my sexual identity for a long time because I kept telling myself the same story about who I was and who I needed to be, or who I even maybe wanted to be, but wasn't, which kind of sad. I mean, I want to be a downer, but like when I think about it, I feel like I missed a lot of time because of the things I told myself, the things society told me or my family told me, sure. But I think more than anything, it was the things I was telling myself that prevented me from being able to be authentic.
Yeah, of course. I actually think that the queer community is, and this is just my perspective, like also considering the narrative element, I do think queer people are actually in a positive way forced into these questions earlier. You are forced to reevaluate your sense of self. You have to go through this interrogative process that if you're hetero cis person, you actually might not go through that till you're older, or you might not actually ever go through it because you aren't looking at yourself against a society that maybe doesn't welcome you, or your sense of self doesn't line up exactly with societal expectations, right? So I would say in a positive way, you probably had to go through this process much younger, right, than a lot of people, and in a more thorough way. And that is actually a really useful tool because you had to discard all of these expectations when you're a lot younger, right? So releasing yourself from heteronormativity or all of these cultural norms and have to go, ooh, okay, that's not me, but now who am I, right? And then it gives you another platform to really become authentic. So I wouldn't look at it as sad, because in some ways you were able to do something that a lot of people will never do.
Thank you for affirming that my life is not sad. So this show is not about me. It's going to be about you. But I want to say, I'm just realizing now as we're having this conversation that I feel like I've had like a changing who I am in my middle ages experience, because I didn't come out until my early 30s. And that's a long time. That's a long time. And so I feel like in some ways I'm, very different than I was when I was 20. And I did reinvent myself in my early 30s. But a lot of that reinvention was just coming to terms with my authentic self and who I am, and doing my best to live my authentic life and what feels good for me. So you mentioned earlier trigger words: divorce, co-parenting, single parenting, right? When you're alone with your children, big moves, career changes. So those are big things. And some of those things are things people never go through in their whole life. So tell me how you balanced all of that, and sobriety, and how you came to this sort of, I got to reinvent myself. I got to figure out who I am, and it's going to maybe look a lot different than I'm comfortable with. What was that process like for you?
Yeah, I don't know, maybe this doesn't resonate for you, but I think a lot of these situations are similar, and that it actually comes from a pain point. And maybe you went through that too when you were deciding to come out. It's like, actually, the pain of being stuck is greater than the pain of pushing myself through this transition. And I would say in all of my reinventions or transitional sort of, I don't know, coming out in my own way, right? I felt like it was because of pain. It was like, when I had to admit I was an alcoholic, I mean, that was so hard, because I was 35 and I thought I was like a party girl. I mean, you might remember, like in high school, where we went to high school, I mean, people were building beer bongs, when we were 16. It was very normalized heavy drinking. And so
I was in the other room where people were just eating all the cheese.
Oh,
yeah. That's what some people think of when they think of Wisconsin. Just us sitting in a room eating the cheese curds, squirting cheese into his mouth.
Doing that. I should have been doing that. I should have been bonging cheese, actually. But yeah, like I had I woke up with alcohol poisoning on my 16th birthday, and the doctors at the hospital, they told my parents I was an alcoholic. They said, there's no way this kid could drink what she drank and not be doing this regularly. And I was 16 years old, right? But like my parents didn't want to admit something was wrong. I didn't. So it's kind of like, let's pack her up and send her to college and hope this problem goes away. Of course, it got worse. It was, I went to a big party school in Arizona. I had, just the drinking culture and all of that combined. It was a lot of shitty things happen, but I never wanted to admit that alcohol was the problem. So anyway, I basically spent my 20s trying to manage my drinking, while also being hyper productive and kind of perfectionist in my
so you're very
straight A's in college. Yeah.
Would you say? Yeah. So
like, yeah,
that's a good word.
Like
so
functioning.
Yeah. Like that's a mask a lot of people can wear, is that like nobody would guess, because you're still doing great at work and you're still doing all of these things. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was something that in some ways I needed that. I needed to create this image of myself. I went to law school. I moved to New York. I had I worked at a big law firm. Like I was doing things that on paper or on the surface looked, I'm putting quotes in the air, successful or productive in some way. And I think in my 20s, it was like, where do I want to be when I'm 25? Like I'm in New York working at a law firm in Manhattan. In some ways I had made it, but that was a rock bottom for me. I started drinking a lot more. I was doing cocaine, things that I didn't even try cocaine until I was like 27. And I was like, why have I never done this before? Like, it was not great. It was like this real, everything was heightened. It was like, I needed to push this, I don't know, my own experiences to to not flatline. It was like, I do this. I got engaged. I called off my wedding. I like traveled the world. Everything I did was this escapist.
Nothing's ever good enough. And then there's always something else to go out and conquer or do.
Yeah. And so when I was like 31, I think I kind of thought, maybe if I settle down and have a baby, then I won't be in all this pain and I won't be this person. And so in some ways, marriage and children for me were another form of escape. It was like, oh, maybe if I do this, that'll like solve my existential crisis. And so I was in Berlin. I was actually just going to travel here and like go back to San Francisco. And then I got on a dating app and met my now ex-husband. But it was this whirlwind European romance. It was kind of at the time romantic because I was like, okay, I'm just going to like sell all my stuff, move to Berlin. We got married that year and then I got pregnant. And
was it like my big fat Greek wedding and my big fat German romance or no?
Actually, it's really funny because there's a picture of the wedding and I don't know anybody in the photo. It's like random people from my German class. Like nobody is like in my life anymore, which tells its own story. And I was like, it was just nothing. It was not like a stable life choice.
Yeah.
And like, I mean, it's a longer story, but basically like once my daughter was born, it shook out very real, very, very fast. There was no way to have those two lives anymore. And I always describe it as sort of like, in some ways, like childbirth being the sort of awakening of my own trauma and my own past. It was like somehow, I don't know, it's a bit spiritual, but it felt like something in me like was shaken. I was like, I have to start looking at myself in a real way, not just because me drinking was like a real health risk to my daughter, but it was also, I could feel something in me shifting where I was like, I have to change. I have to do something different. So I would say for me going through recovery, it was like my biggest shift in my life in the sense of having to be honest with myself, looking at my own pain and my own traumas. What I was saying to you before the call is that I think in our 20s, we're just not old enough to see the consequences of our actions. I still think we're in a phase of you can just live, you can kind of like run to the next thing. You haven't yet gotten the experience of things catching up with you. And I think that's what happens in our 30s and 40s in a very real way, where it's like, oh, actually, everything that I have or have not done in my life is going to start manifesting, and I'm going to start feeling it, whether that's physically, spiritually, emotionally, financially, right? Everything, the way we've lived our lives it's going to catch up.
That's all going to come back and get you.
That.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I'm currently under siege from all of the grilled stuffed burritos that I used to eat at Taco Bell when I was 20. It is all getting me now because, metabolism is a great example of things
coming to haunt you.
Yeah. When I was 20, I could eat a grilled stuffed burrito at midnight with my friends and not feel the effects of it. But now I'll get heartburn for 3 days and gain 3 pounds and then retain water for a week. So
your body knows.
Yeah.
Body keeps the score.
Right. But also in your 20s, you don't feel always these, it just doesn't feel as permanent. It doesn't feel like everything is as big. And in some ways, I think that's good because it does allow you to take these risks and to do things that, when you're saying some of these things that you did when you're 20, I can't imagine taking some of those risks now at 40, like just hopping up and going here. But when you're 20, it feels like you've got this whole long thing to live, this whole long life ahead of you.
It feels like your 20s are going to last forever. I remember it's like being 21 thinking like, the next 10 years, like it's going to be so much time. And then you turn 30 and it's like, holy shit. I mean, it goes so fast. Mm-hmm. And I think for me, I don't know if you went through this, but when I was about to turn 30, I was really struggling because my brother and sister had already gotten married. They already had kids. Here I was like single, kind of a mess. And I thought, I just wanted to do something that felt like really stable. And that's why this is kind of silly, but I called, I'm not going to say his name because we went to high school with him, but somebody we went to high school with who was my high school boyfriend. We like reconnected on Skype, and we hadn't even seen each other in like 10 years. So we were like 28, and we decided to move in together and get engaged. And it was like this whole, I think the fantasy of like, again, trying to make meaning out of life. I think we both were turning 30 and a bit desperate. Like, we need to do something now that feels important and stable. And, you know, it was a bit of a train wreck because we separated after like 6 months, but we went through the whole thing. I dropped out of grad school, moved in with him, planned a wedding. And then like 3 weeks before the wedding, I called it off and left the country. But
it's not just called it off and left the country. But
yes,
so this is like a, think about like when you were in your 20s, or like I'm thinking when I was watching Friends in my 20s, and they were like, okay, listen, if you're single and I'm single when we're still 30,
yes,
we'll just get married. It's kind of that idea of like,
it was that.
Yeah, there's this point at which you think, I've got to do the thing that everyone else is doing in order to sort of get my life moving in this direction that feels mature and responsible. And so in order to do that, I'm going to do this like immature, irresponsible thing that's like get engaged to my best friend who I haven't seen in a long time, but I know that he's really funny.
Yeah. He was really funny.
See,
you know, I look back at that time and like we had a great connection. I mean, I loved him, but it was not a good, it wasn't a good match. Also in time, like I personally don't think I was in a good space. So to make healthy decisions, it was like, I was doing like way too many drugs and drinking too much. And for me, it was like, I was just craving an answer to these feelings of pressure, which I actually think I have a lot of friends who are in their like late 20s, early 30s. And when I listen to them, I really hear the stress around whether or not to have children. And if someone does want kids, there's a real pressure to like find a partner, because there's this idea of like, well, if you don't have a baby by the time you're 35, and then you're doing the math, you're like, okay, that means I need to get pregnant at 34 and then like married by, I don't know, 32 or 33, which means I have to meet the guy by the time I'm like 30 or 31. And that math is a lot of stress for women. And that's how I was doing the math of like, how old do I have to be when I meet the guy so I can check all these things off my list so I'm not behind, right? And I hadn't felt that actually in my early 20s. I felt a lot of wide open space. So when I was approaching 30, it felt like a lot of pressure to get everything done really quickly. And that is how I am now stuck in a foreign country. Yes, I just rushed everything. It's like I kind of was just plowing through to, have some feeling of being not successful, but like meeting the benchmarks,
stable. Yeah. Then, you're right. There are benchmarks. And for women, especially when you start backing up the math, you've got to wonder at some point. I had a friend who went through a late breakup where she sort of had been with this person and thought they were going to have children, and then it didn't work out. And then she was sort of like, do I even have time now? Like, I've got to meet someone, I've got to develop the relationship, and hopefully they're right. And then and then before I know it, I'm 38. She's like, is it even going to happen for me? So I do think there is a point at which people start doing the math and think, maybe I'm better off to stay here and try to make this work so I can have kids than I am if I get out of this, because I don't know if there's time to get out of this and get into something else. If having children is really important to you,
Yeah, it's really hard.
Yeah.
What I would say, looking back at my younger self, I would just say like, you just have so much more time than you think. And there's a couple women I know who even, people we graduated with who had kids in their 40s. And it's like, it's not impossible. And it's like, I don't know. I think, we just, as women, put so much pressure on ourselves. And one thing that I've noticed, I don't know if there's this trend of like egg freezing, and I think in theory it's good. But one thing I've noticed when I listen to women talk about egg freezing is there's this like hyper perfectionism, I think, in this thinking of like, you're going to have this financial stability and like the perfect life and everything's going to be set up so that when you're completely 100% ready, then you're like fresh eggs are there for you. Personally, I just don't think life works this way. I think sometimes we do have to take risks. And, sometimes I think I've noticed talking to younger women, like Gen Z, like young millennials, where it's like there's this focus on like, having everything sort of perfect before you make life choices. And I think I think it can be dangerous because not everything is perfect, and life can be like making mistakes and growing and learning new things. And if you look at life as, okay, it only works if everything is set up perfectly, you're going to be setting yourself up for disappointment, right? And I think I've noticed that talking to younger women, I hear a lot of this. On the other hand, be smart. It's like maybe they're smarter than I was,
No, you're right. It's totally a balance. Because when have you ever looked at your life and been like, oh, everything's aligned. I'm ready. It's perfect. The timing is perfect. My health is great. I've paid all my bills. I have a great job. I have the love. I mean, these things just don't happen that way. But on the other hand, like you said, there is a little bit of like, hey, if you're not, if you don't have a career or a job that's stable, maybe now isn't the time to have children, right? And so I think there is kind of this balance of figuring out how to make those decisions. It sounds to me like sobriety had the decision to become sober had a lot to do with your growth in the direction of maturity and responsibility, and also owning some of these things, your experiences and shaping them. Would you say that was really the big turning point for you, is deciding to become sober and that process of doing that?
Yeah, because I think I just had I didn't have any real sense of self before that. I mean, I thought I did. I thought I was independent and strong. I thought I had a really good sense of self. It was really hard to go through sobriety and realize, oh, actually, I'm kind of insecure. And it's kind of like you realizing you're not always an extrovert. It was going through sobriety. It was like, actually, I'm kind of shy. Actually, I am insecure in a lot of ways. I have a lot of fears. And I used to think, because I was a crazy risk taker. It was like, I'm going to, I would jump off buildings into pools. I would, jump on an airplane and go wherever. Like I was always, or like randomly getting engaged, I was always taking risks. And I thought that made me fearless. And when I went through sobriety, I realized like, oh no, that was my fear. I pushed things because I couldn't sit still. I couldn't be with myself. I was always uncomfortable. And so I think I pushed myself in a lot of ways because I didn't know how to be with myself. And so sobriety was like the first time in my life I was able to have clarity on who I was and really make sense of my past, but also not just reinvent, but go like, who am I? Who am I really? So that I can, as I move forward in my life, not do things because of social pressure or because I think I'm this way, I should do this, getting clear on who I was so that I didn't feel that pressure anymore.
And that's scary, right? I mean, when you've been putting it off for that long, because that's essentially what happens, right? When you start self-medicating and using alcohol or drugs at a young age, is that you've been putting off, coming to terms with yourself for so long. And I in some ways I can relate, because I think that's what happened to me in my sexuality and my sexual identity development, was that when I really, really get to the back of my brain, if that's a place people go when they think about things hard, I knew, but I didn't allow myself to know, and I didn't allow myself to be that. And so I spent a lot of time really trying to reinvent myself to everybody else. And like you said, when you talked about a pain point, that there is a point at which you say, it's more painful to continue this than it is to just own it and move forward. I wish that had happened sooner for me than it did. But I'm, happy to be where I'm at and feel really good about who I am now. But I think I feel like I missed a chunk of my life because I just wasn't ready. And luckily for myself, I didn't use drugs or alcohol to cope with that. I probably used my extroversion to cope with that, right? I did a lot of like being out and going out and being social and having fun and staying busy as a way to not really sit and reflect on how I feel about who I am and what I'm doing. But I think a lot of people have that experience in their middle age where they go, oh, wow, these are things that I've not really ever given significant thought to, and have the time to slow down and to think about myself, who I am, what I want, etc.
Yeah. And I think that's the most important thing is we're never too old. You know, I had the same feeling of, oh my God, I got sober when I was 35. I should have started when I was 16 when the doctors told me to get sober, you know, but for whatever reason, I wasn't ready and I took a different path. And I'm sure you've gone through this too, or like one thing that's really important to me is forgiving myself for that, forgiving myself for what I could call wasted time or something. But when I get into that story of, oh, I wasted time, or I should have done that, you know, the shoulda, woulda, coulda kind of regret feelings, I really have to try to pull out the stories of the highlights of, okay, yeah, but I also did this and I did this and I had this experience and I was like this, you know, all of the good things that also I experienced during those years, everything I learned during those years. I find it really valuable to highlight the positive experiences I had during that time, just so I don't focus on what I could, you know, because that's a dangerous road, right? To think, oh, I could have been, you know, for you, oh, I could have come out when I was 16 and then who I'd be. It's like, yeah, but you would have missed out on other things. So it's important to remember that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, I think you have to give yourself some credit, right? I mean, things weren't great, but you still did jump off a building into a pool, right? Did you actually do that? I need to know more.
I was in Bali and I was just with this kid who was like, he was like riding motorcycles all over Bali and we were staying at the same like hotel. And I think at the same time, we were like, I wonder if we can jump from this roof into the pool. And we could.
You did. Dang. Yeah. So, I didn't do, I'm boring. I've never jumped off a roof. I've never had a spur of the moment engagement. So,
but then how many near-death experiences have you avoided?
Yeah, you're right. That is true. But I do think there's value in saying, yeah, I coulda, woulda, shoulda, but also sort of like I did the cliche that all things happen for a reason, right? Like, yeah, you could have done that, but that's not what happened. And anyway, you still had these great experiences that have shaped who you are and what you and how you understand life. So you can't discount those either. You have to validate some of the things and choices you've made in your life while still admitting maybe some of them could have been better. So I think it's.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
One thing with narrative, I was going to say is like, I think there's always going to be different versions of the stories we tell about ourselves. And I always use this example with clients because I think it's kind of funny, but like when I was 20, I got arrested and I was like, there's this like mugshot of me, you know, somewhere, luckily.
Currently Googling.
No, actually, it's fun. My brother used to have it. For some reason, my brother kept the mugshot and then, I don't know, we lost it. But it was very like Lindsay Lohan, like, you know, the big hair and tears. But, you know, then there's also, you know, pictures of me, you know, graduating from law school, like the next year. You know, it wasn't like even that big of a time frame. But the point is like, there's always different versions of ourselves, right? Different points in our life where we think, this was like a really great moment. And then this was a very shitty, regretful moment. But we get to choose our own stories and we do get to choose the ones we remember. And like, it's not about erasing the past or like pretending things didn't happen. It's just highlighting the ones that are going to propel you forward in a positive way. So is it helpful for me to think about things I regret and, you know, oh, I could have done this? It's not helpful. Actually, it's really helpful to remember who I am and who got sober, who, you know, was able to leave an abusive marriage, who like is able to live in a foreign country and like remembering the good things I've done so that I don't get stuck in that. Right. And we all have a choice in how we see ourselves and the stories we tell about ourselves, not just to other people, but what stories are we telling to ourselves about ourselves, right? And being aware of what they are, you know. And this regret story, I think, is common for people our age. Is very common to have regrets or, oh, I should have done this major. Or I should have, you know, I could have. I always think, oh, I should have gone to art school, you know. And it's like, really, like, is that would I really be in a better place? Like, who knows? Yeah.
I think in 1998 or 99, I bought a denim jacket from Old Navy. And I think it had to have been like 1998. Okay, now I need to figure out when Old Navy opened up because it was, at the time.
We were in high school.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. So at the time I lived in Southern California. So it was just before I moved to Wisconsin. And I bought this Old Navy denim jacket.
And on the back of it, it had like what used to be Old Navy's kind of symbol was like this really cool, like old farm truck. And it said like Old Navy. I wish I would have saved it. I feel like,
Okay.
see, so like this many years down the road, I'm still regretting the fact that I didn't save that jean jacket because I feel like one, it's vintage, two, like maybe I could have made a boatload on eBay with this like original, one of a kind, first year Old Navy existed denim jacket, production number 67.
Yeah. Or you could be a fashion icon because all the kids now are wearing 90s clothes.
Denim jackets have come back like 3 times since then. So there's been moments in my life where I wished I still had it. Are they in now? I don't do things that are in. Okay. Oh, thank God. I got to find it. Also like Doc Martens and things that I got rid of that I really, really wish I would have kept.
Well, you can still find those.
Yeah, I know. But, not the ones that I got for Christmas in 1998. Yeah. So you said earlier you're never too old. Right. The idea that it's not too late. What are some things that you've done that you thought it may be too late to do and really prevented you from doing it, but now you've done it and move forward?
So basically, I feel like my life kind of started when I got sober. And so because I had a lot of energy, and even though I had 2 little kids, after I got divorced, I had a lot of free time because I was a co-parent. And I really just went through this phase of like, I'm going to do everything I've ever wanted to do, So I did burlesque dancing and I started that, I was like 38. I was doing burlesque. I started this podcast. I did stand-up comedy, like live storytelling, I went to acting school. I was like, I'm going to be an actress, and I started playing guitar.
You're very brave. Has anybody ever told you that? Like that's, no. No, really, like truly to do those things, to put yourself out there in that way and get those experiences that you want to have it's really brave. I think a lot of people, especially as we get older, don't take those chances.
No. And it's like, but I also felt like, what if I don't do it?
Yeah.
It was the pain. It was again, that pain point of like, if I don't do this, I'm going to regret it. And better to do burlesque when I'm 38 instead of 70, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, it was like better to try doing stand-up comedy now instead of like thinking about it for 10 more years. And that's how I am, is I know I would think about it. And it was funny because actually being an actress was always the like back of my head dream. And when I got to acting school, like it was interesting and fun, but it was actually like, oh, I don't really need to do this. And so it was kind of a cool experience to let go of my dream, like let go of that regret and go, okay, now I've done this, or I've done a version of it. So I don't have to obsess over what if I could do it. And I think we can always try things and push. And like you call it brave, which is interesting because it's not easy for me. None of these things were like really natural. It was more, how can I push myself a bit to get over that feeling of fear and also to not have regret anymore? Because I think that's what happened when I got sober. It's like, I don't want to regret time. I don't want to regret not doing all these things that I know I could do and could pursue. And it's funny because I know I was joking with you about like, why did I never start a rap career? But I actually started rapping. Like I started like making beats and like recording some lyrics, and I'm going to try to get a show here and just do it because who cares? And that's the other thing, is the older I get, I realize like no one fucking cares about you. Like no one cares. And that's what I would have liked to have known when I was younger, is how little people give a shit about what you're doing and what you're not doing. And it's really just about you and what kind of person do you want to be, or how do you see yourself, and how can you push yourself a bit to be that person, even if it's uncomfortable, because it's not easy for me either. Yeah.
You're very talented. Obviously much more creative of a person than I am, because all of those things you listed sound cool, and I would try maybe half of them because I'm just not very creative. I want to go to one of those adult camps. You've seen those where like,
yeah, you should.
Why do like adults go to camp for like a week and just like live their
their childhood dreams with other adults.
Oh my God, so many hookups,
God.
so many bunk bed hookups.
Okay, that I don't need. I just want to play kickball and like, push a friend off the dock into the lake or something. That's all I want.
I'm like, ooh, I'm single, so
That's what's on your mind.
yeah, I'm like, give me a bunk bed and a camp counselor, please.
There you go. A little love by the fire pit.
Mm-hmm.
I think, and truly I mean this when I say it, like the idea that you have all of these things that you want to try and do or experience, you are very creative, but also very brave to do that. Because I think a lot of folks won't even let themselves go there. Like not even, hey, I could go to acting school, but even admitting that that could be something you're interested in. And I think part of that, like the way that you're coping and dealing with experiencing yourself is to say like, okay, what are these things that I really want to do? Or what are these things I need to check out so I can say no to because I tried it and it's not for me. Yeah. That's a really cool experience that I don't think a lot of people give themselves. I know I haven't given myself that kind of freedom or that kind of experience to be able to just go out and try things and figure out what it is that I like and need and what fills my cup at that time, right? Because those things can also change over time. Like you said, you might not do burlesque for 40 years, but you did it for 3 and it was cool and you liked it or whatever. I made that number up.
Yeah. Just like, cool. I got some glitter and like cool costumes and it was a great experience. And sometimes I'm like, oh, I should keep doing that. But the other thing I would say is like what happened with burlesque is it was a lot of time of just like choreography, like practice, like making the costumes, networking. And I'm like, do I really have time for this? I mean, like I said, I still am a parent. I have 2 kids. I had to work. So with the burlesque, I kind of let it go because of time commitments. And it was one of those things like, had I started when I was 20, maybe I would have been more willing to put the energy into it. But I think this is another thing that holds us back, right? Is like real life is, I don't want to say that people don't have real responsibilities and they can just like go off to cheer camp because we do have things we're committed to. But on the other hand, like where can you make space in your life? I love the book, The Artist's Way, just in the sense that, I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's basically like reconnecting with your artist self, which we all have some creative self. And even if you don't want to make art, it's like learning how to connect with that part of you, this like child self, this younger version that has all these dreams and ambitions. And how do you connect with that? And we can all do that in very small ways. You can go to a dance class or you can, it doesn't have to be this grand reinvention of self. You can do little things that help you really feel alive and really connect with that part of you that you might have been neglecting. And I think that's the danger of getting older and complacent and thinking we can't do these things or that we just don't have time or we just, it doesn't matter because you need to give that energy to other people. And I think as mothers, there's this expectation. And the other thing is every parent is different. Like every person is different. So the way we parent is going to be different. And so I say that because I think for some people, they don't need to be making art or they don't need to be woodworking or, they might not have these different passions. And maybe for them, it's like, I love taking my kids to their basketball games and they get fulfillment. And so I don't mean to denigrate that because I think we all do have very different needs. It's just knowing what those are, right? And not ignoring them.
I want to ask you one more question to sort of wrap this up. When you look back at your 20-year-old self or your college self, what would you like to tell her now that you think would be meaningful?
Well, I think it's what I already said, which is that you really can do anything you want. It's really just about having a little bit of confidence and a little bit of fear busting, and not never feel stuck, And I think, you remember in college when everyone's like, what's your major? And it felt so self-defining of like, what's your major? And that's something I think as young people, we kind of get forced into this belief that like what we're doing now is going to, define us forever. And it's just not true. Like you can major in one thing and then get a master's in something else or, go to trade school when you're 30. Like you have so many chances actually to become who you want to be. And I feel like it's great if you figure that out when you're 20, but it's also fine if you are 40 and still kind of exploring who that person is. And there's always opportunity for that. And also, like, how cool is that we could be 60 or 70 and still going, oh, I actually want to try this new thing. Like, to me, that's what makes life worth living. So we should never give up on the things that we are curious about or excited about. Like, we have to find those passions regardless of our responsibilities and the things that give us security, but always be willing to explore who we are, I think is so important.
Yeah, don't give up on your dreams, people.
No, go to cheer camp.
Go to cheer camp. My best friend, who I've had on the show before, is going back to school to become a therapist. And I'm just like, I don't know if I've told her this, so I guess I'm telling her very publicly now. Like, I'm so proud of her. I think, deciding to change your career, saying like, I had this wonderful 20-year career and I really loved it. Well, I want to do something else. I think I have a skill in this area and I want to check it out. And I'm so proud of her for taking the risk to do that. And I just think it's so brave and so cool. And so I, in talking to you, have had some of these same realizations about like, what is it that I really want to be doing, and to give myself the freedom to do that though.
But also, even just starting the podcast, I remember when you first posted, I was like, yes, because you had mentioned, even in your first post, there was this, I can't remember what you said, but it was a bit of insecurity. It was like,
I'm nervous.
I don't remember. So you said something like that, but I remember just thinking like, hell yes, like do it anyway. And I'm even just watching your journey with this, like you're so committed, you're so talented. Like, it's a great podcast, and you also had fear going into it, right? But you were still able to like do it anyway. And I think it's so valuable.
This has been wonderful. I feel like we could, go on a tangent and have a second show. So, and who's to say that we won't? So, Kate, thank you for your time. And I know that we're in totally different time zones, and it took a while for us to make this work, but I really appreciate you being here and sharing your story. And I hope that we do this again in the future, or you can have me on your show. Just saying.
Yeah, we have to do it. Yes. Thank you so much.
Okay. This is Hot Flashbacks. We're out.
Want more? We're on all the major podcasting platforms like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Amazon Music. Just search for Hot Flashbacks and subscribe.